welcome to the channel. Today, I delve into the biggest blow-up at Fairmont Crest, the moment Kat catches Ava and Tomas together, calling them both trash, setting off a chilling chain of retaliation. But the real twist comes from Leslie and Eva, who decide to play the silent game, isolating Kat with the no-fuss the room back to the room strategy. I'll trace their fractured past, unravel why Kat always wants to control the story, and predict how the next episode will plunge everyone into despair. If you're into slow burn, explosive drama, this video is for you. Be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next fiery analysis. The night that began with glitter ended with ruin, and it did so in a way that felt inevitable long before Kat's breath seized at the sight of Eva and Tomas together. The rot had been spreading for months in the quiet places where envy learns the shapes of people's softest spots. It began the first time Kat mistook possession for devotion, when success made her bolder and exhaustion made her careless, when she started measuring affection like inventory: who showed up, who answered, who posted, who impressed. She told herself she was protecting her pride, but she was only building a fortress with windows that faced inward. Eva noticed the windows. Eva always saw what was framed and what was cropped out. She remembered the early weeks when Tomas arrived with a smile that looked like a promise and a history that sounded like a hazard. He wasn't a villain, not at first, he was a mirror for whatever stood in front of him. Around Kat, he was sharp edges and ambition; around Eva, he was warmth and apology without words; around Eva, he was a challenge she hadn't asked for, a reminder that desire can be unremarkable and still wrecking. The first fracture occurred when Kat treated closeness like a test that only she could grade. She scrolled, she compared, she curated, she pretended every room was a courtroom and every heartbeat a witness. Tomas failed the test by being human. Eva failed by not pretending otherwise. And the night of exposure, of bodies in the wrong frame and hands in the wrong light, became the consequence everyone privately anticipated but nobody admitted they had rehearsed. Anger made Kat eloquent in the worst ways; it gave her a cold clarity that could slice. She labeled Eva and Tomas with words that carried the weight of final sentences. The words were less about them and more about the story Kat told herself each time love disappointed her: that other people wreck beauty for sport, that intimacy is a tournament, that forgiveness is a luxury for the weak. Those words landed like shards at the feet of Eva, who had tried to protect her dignity by convincing herself that Tomas's attention had meant very little. Yet meaning has a way of surviving contempt. Eva felt the humiliation first as heat behind the eyes and then as a vow not to be an object lesson in someone else's cautionary tale. Leslie, meanwhile, had long practiced the politics of dark rooms and softer voices. Her patience with Kat's pattern was not born of innocence but of inventory. She could count the times Kat hardened herself and called it strength, the times she dragged Eva's missteps into the light and called it honesty. Leslie's refusal to accept what Kat had done to Eva did not come from moral superiority. It came from contempt for needless cruelty, from weary memory, and from an understanding that reputations shatter loud while loyalties die quiet. What the past made clear, even before the scandal, was that Kat had cultivated a culture of leverage. People were tokens, secrets were currency, gestures were investments graded on return. She told herself she simply refused to be played, and yet this produced precisely the kind of game that swallows peace whole. Eva learned to move like fog. Present everywhere, blamed for everything, touched by nothing. Tomas learned to live between confessions, where nothing is technically a lie because nothing is fully told. Eva learned to stand straight when wind snaps branches, and to let humiliation ferment into strategy. And Leslie learned that family is another word for collected debts. So when Kat's condemnation arrived, those cold, contemptuous labels cast like verdicts, Eva did not lunge, she calculated. Leslie did not scold, she planned. The revenge they shaped was not a storm but a weather system, patient, pressure-building, intent on collapse without thunder. They did not want spectacle, they wanted silence around Kat so complete that her voice would echo back at her, stripped of audience, shrill as a fire alarm that no longer signals an exit. The blueprint began with the most fragile pillar of Kat's identity, control over narrative. She thrived when she could choose the angles, edit the context, and frame herself as the relentlessly wronged woman who rises anyway. Leslie knew a better stage than public outrage, private isolation. She would cool her tone, withhold warmth, and coordinate quiet refusals across the rooms Kat believed she owned. Invitations would be delayed for reasons that sounded legitimate, support would be pledged in phrases that meant nothing. Opportunities would be rerouted so gently that Kat would blame the wind before she blamed anyone specific. Eva, for her part, would become the contrast, composed without pretending, present without begging, productive without performing contrition. She would not smear Kat. She would not even mention her. She would make Kat's insults look like a woman shouting across an empty street. And because the human heart despises being ignored more than it hates being attacked, Kat's anger would have nowhere to go but inward. The plan was a choreography of absence. No slander, no spectacle, just a rearrangement of attention that would make Kat feel like she had stepped out of her life for a moment and returned to find all the furniture moved. Tomas, ironically, mattered less to the mechanism than Kat believed. He was the match, not the burn. He drifted to Eva out of the oldest habit in the book: people go where they feel least weaponized. Eva didn't excuse him, she simply didn't crucify him. That humility, maddening to Kat, made Eva both vulnerable and powerful. Vulnerable because forgiveness spoils badly when poured on arrogance, powerful because it gives the forgiver freedom of movement. Eva recognized that Eva's composure could anchor the plan. If Eva refused the role of temptress or traitor and instead radiated unfussy normalcy, Kat's outrage would look like overkill. It would become a story about overreaction, not betrayal, and Kat's brand could not withstand being cast as reckless again. Leslie knew the second pillar to target was Kat's supply lines, the allies who tolerated her edge because it served them. By offering those allies relief from Kat's volatility, routine, predictability, and a touch of grace, Leslie could move entire rooms by barely pushing a chair. The skill of their revenge lay in its refusal to call itself revenge. It resembled a rebalancing of gravity. Events were convened without Kat as center, decisions were made without sending her the notes, and small courtesies drifted away from her orbit. The effect was cumulative. A sponsor delayed a payment with apologies and blamed accounting. A collaborator asked for time to reassess timelines. A confidant stopped answering at midnight. It was nothing you could point to without seeming paranoid, and everything you could feel if you kept a scorecard of little humiliations. Kat, who had always weaponized momentum, woke to find that momentum had switched teams. She adjusted at first with rituals she trusted. Stricter discipline, stricter messages, stricter stories. But rigor without relationship is just friction, and soon even her victories felt like accidents that owed her nothing. The more she demanded clarity from others, the more opaque the world became. The more she tried to expose Eva as opportunist and Tomas as coward, the more people looked at her and saw a woman narrating a horror film from inside the mirror. When the first true consequence landed, it did not roar. It came as a polite decline from a gatekeeper who had always returned Kat's calls. The tone was tender enough to bruise. They were pivoting the slate, they said. They were excited about new voices. They thanked her for her commitment to excellence. It read like mercy and felt like exile. 2 days later, an option she relied on vanished. A week after that, a rumor circulated that wasn't cruel, only cooling: someone else had become the person to know. None of it traced back to Leslie or Eva, which made it more effective and less reversible. Kat's appetite for control warped into a craving for reassurance, then into suspicion at anyone who offered it. She breathed in the feedback loops of her own narratives until they turned sour. The city did not turn against her, it simply looked past her. The worst punishment was not disgrace but demotion to decorative. By the time she realized that the plan against her was an architecture of quiet, it had already been furnished and rented out. And across the room, Leslie watched with the exhaustion of someone who wished this lesson had not become necessary, while Eva found in herself a colder mercy than she had known she possessed. Eva, meanwhile, kept working, kept moving, and kept refusing to apologize for a gravity that had pulled two lonely people into one unwise orbit. The stage was reset, and the second act, where consequences mature into tragedies, prepared itself without fanfare. The aftermath did not crescendo, it fermented. The new season inside Kat's life smelled like varnish and stale flowers, a sheen over something that had already died. She poured herself into productivity, the last refuge of the cornered. She planned, she posted, she prepped, she perfected. But precision without reception is the loneliest labor, and one by one the measures she counted on to prove her relevance stopped counting back. Metrics softened. Endorsements paused. Rooms she used to command now hummed with a politeness that moved around her like water around a stone. She was in the picture, but the focus rested elsewhere. The worst part was that there was no headline to fight, no lie to correct, no villain to drag. There was only the cold arithmetic of attention, and for the first time in years, the math refused to forgive her. Leslie understood that despair arrived slow and then all at once. The plan she had co-authored with Eva never asked for Kat's total collapse, it asked for the humility that comes from being unable to bend a room to your will. But control rarely yields to humility without taking hope hostage first. As Kat felt the scaffolding loosen, she reached for old weapons, distraction, projection, immaculate statements about principle that hid the simple bruise of rejection. She told herself she was being iced out by frauds. She told herself Eva wanted what she had built without earning the scars. She told herself Eva's sudden calm was nothing more than theatrical restraint. Yet the mirror told a more dangerous story, that the same sharpness she used to survive had stopped serving her, and the edge now cut her own hands. That admission was too expensive to make in public, so she paid for it in private with sleepless math and restless inventory of who had failed to clap. The silence between her heartbeat and her phone became a venue where accusations learned to speak fluent self-doubt. Eva, for her part, did not delight in Kat's unraveling. She tracked it like a forecast she had predicted but still wished would be wrong. She showed up where she was asked, did more than she promised, left without extracting praise. She trained her nervous system to live without vindication. The discipline made her luminous in rooms that had grown tired of fire. She didn't eclipse Kat on purpose, she simply no longer orbited her. That, more than any insult, became the wound Kat could not stop touching. If Eva could thrive without conflict, what did that say about who had authored the conflict in the first place? If Leslie could orchestrate a kinder order, what did that say about the chaos Kat had called truth? The questions would have been healing had Kat allowed them to land. Instead, she converted each into a fresh indictment of a world that dared to reorganize itself without asking her permission. The negative path they had chosen, quiet exclusion over flashy exposure, carried a cruelty of its own. It denied Kat the catharsis of a fight. There was no showdown to win, no apology to extract, no dramatic scene to dominate. Only the daily friction of being unnecessary. The human soul is not designed to live long in that climate without cracking. The first crack came in the form of a mistake so small it would have been forgivable in any other season. Kat misread a calendar and missed a window that mattered to the people still betting on her. She blamed logistics, then blamed fatigue, then blamed an assistant who had stopped waiting for instructions that arrived dressed as ultimatums. The apology she issued was perfect and unconvincing. The second crack came with money, not a loss, a leak. A steady drip of expenses that used to be paid with favors now paid with invoices. Influence gets discounts. Isolation pays retail. She caught up, but the catching up became a new job layered on top of the old one, and no one pays extra for weight carried invisibly. Ava's role through all this remained the most misunderstood. People wanted her to be either villain or victim, she preferred being employed. She didn't flaunt Tomas, and she didn't hide him. She accepted the cost of a choice she hadn't made loudly but had made nonetheless. Tomas, seeking redemption without necessarily wanting to change, floated through each day with a competence edged by remorse. He tried to be useful. Sometimes he succeeded. Sometimes he was a reminder that affection and wisdom rarely share a calendar. The city, ever hungry for spectacle, tried to bait Ava into throwing gasoline, but she kept showing up with water, boring, consistent, undeniable. Eva and Leslie counted on this steadiness the way pilots count on runway lights, simple bulbs that prevent catastrophe. Their plan required not just pressure on Kat but proof of an alternative center of gravity. Ava's refusal to become an anecdote gave them that proof. The inevitable end of this arc was not a screaming match but a closed door. Kat arrived at a place she had never been refused before and found her key no longer worked. The person on the other side expressed regret shaped like policy, and policy shaped like a mirror. The message was concise, the room had recalibrated, and the calibration did not include her as axis. Kat left with a smile that showed too much tooth and a resolve that cracked the minute the elevator doors closed. She had always believed that if anyone tried to exile her, she would torch the gates and build something better. But the exhaustion that had been stacking pebbles on her back finally emptied a bucket of stone. She did not burn anything. She went home and overorganized a kitchen that had never mattered to her before. She donated stacks of clothing and threw out a vase she had once declared iconic. She watched a video of herself in a year when rooms still leaned toward her and couldn't decide if she had been happier then or simply noisier. The truly dark turn arrived in a form that revenge architects never admit they dread. Collateral damage that falls in the wrong direction. In the vacuum around Kat, someone eager to impress misused a confidence she had, for once, protected. It wasn't a scandal, it was a slip that placed a private grief into a public whisper. The whisper threaded itself into the new order with obscene efficiency. Leslie tried to shut it down, but rumors love new management, and this one wore a calm voice and a neutral font. Eva confronted the person responsible with a clarity that expected decency and found only strategy. Eva closed ranks around the target without publishing a banner. Tomas tried to apologize to everyone at once and predictably satisfied no one. The city did what it always does, pretended to be horrified by the gossip while passing it along like communion. Kat, discovering the leak, misread its origin and aimed her last reserves of fury at the only three people still treating her like a person capable of repair. That misfire was the final subtraction. Leslie let the call end without the ritual assurances. Eva stopped composing the magnanimous message she had planned to send. Ava returned a borrowed book and did not stay for tea. Despair, when it settles, is a quiet tenant. It rearranges furniture without asking, it sleeps on the couch in the afternoon, it leaves the lights on at 3 a.m. Kat tried bargains with herself, 30 days of focus, 90 days without blame, a year of unglamorous service. But you cannot reset a life by treating time like a detox. The work required a surrender she had never learned, the surrender of supremacy. She didn't know how to be important to a room she didn't design. She didn't know how to be forgiven without first being feared. And the plan that Leslie and Eva had engineered, designed to teach precisely that, had worked too well to be amended quickly. The triumph did not feel like triumph to them. It felt like a knot in the throat. They had delivered justice and found themselves holding a woman who had finally stopped fighting and started drowning. Mercy, at that point, would look like a hand extended in a room where no one could afford to be seen reaching first. The negative trajectory reached its nadir on a day indistinguishable from the others, which is how despair prefers to stage its award ceremonies. Kat performed competence until she was alone, then watched a glass of water vibrate slightly on a counter because an upstairs neighbor had moved a chair. The tremor felt like prophecy. She realized, with the suddenness of the obvious, that the revenge against her had never been about making her small, it had been about forcing her to live at true size. The revelation did not heal, it only clarified the size of the wound. Tomas, still orbiting guilt and need, could not fix it. Ava, steadfast and finite, could not fix it. Eva, principled and exhausted, chose not to fix it yet. Leslie, strategic and tender in ways she would never admit, wrote a message she did not send. And the city spun on, uninterested in whether this scene resolved as redemption or as a cautionary epilogue. What happens next, in the darkest honest version, is not a comeback montage but an accounting. Kat faces rooms that will not reconfigure on command and must decide if she will shrink into bitterness or learn a language she has mocked. Patience without leverage, apology without theater, contribution without control. Leslie and Eva must decide whether the lesson they delivered is a sentence or a syllabus. Eva must decide how long she can stand in crosswinds without turning to stone. Tomas must decide whether remorse is a feeling or a practice. None of them will be applauded for choosing well. The best outcomes in these stories never trend. The most likely future, the one no one wants on camera, is that Kat spends a season on the margins learning how to be a person among people, not a weather system above them, while Leslie and Eva watch for signs that consequence has become comprehension. Until then, the plan continues not as vengeance but as gravity. The gates do not slam, they simply fail to open. And somewhere inside the quiet that follows, a woman who once named herself inevitable meets the truth that nothing is, except the bill that arrives when love and power are confused on purpose.